Hello and welcome everybody to this session on reaching out to all, mainstreaming gender and social inclusion to enhance climate actions. My name is Bedashruti Sadhu Khan. I am the Senior Program Coordinator for Sustainability Management in ICLEI South Asia. ICLEI, as most of you would be knowing since you are attending a Daring Cities session, it is an association of local bodies. We work with cities, city corporations, municipalities, municipal corporations, primarily on urban sustainable development and climate resilience. We look at different aspects of urban development and urban resilience. So coming to today's session, we are all aware that there are disproportionate impacts of climate change on communities that are vulnerable, that are socially disadvantaged, that are socially marginalized. And while there are being efforts made on climate mitigation, climate adaptation, but many of these actions sometimes fail to consider gender and social equity aspects when they are planning or implementing these actions. So what I was saying is that by addressing the diversity and gender intersectionality of climate impacts, we expect that policies and programs can potentially minimize the social, economic, and environmental risks while supporting a gender inclusion as well as a just transition. So today's session, we are going to discuss just that. We will be exploring the linkages, the intrinsic linkages between gender responsive climate action and just transition. And for this, we have with us gender and climate experts from different regions who would be presenting on different ways, innovative ways to ensure inclusivity in climate resilience. Today, we will have three speakers, and we are talking today on this issue under the program of Climate and Development Knowledge Network. This is a program which is being supported by IDRC and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Netherlands. And what we are looking at under this program, this is going to be continuing for the next 5 years. We are looking at integrating gender equality and social inclusion in policies and practice. We are also looking at access to finance, equitable finance for supporting locally led solutions. And we are looking at supporting the implementation of equitable and locally appropriate ecosystem-based adaptation for resilience. So we are doing this in three regions, South America, Asia, and Africa. And in Asia, we are working in India, Nepal, and Bangladesh. And in Sri Lanka, we are having a light touch effect. Next, please. So coming to the session today and the panelists today, I would like to introduce our panelist. Our first speaker today is Ms. Karnika Yadav. She is an experienced professional with over 15 years of expertise in development finance and management consulting. She has worked on different strategic consulting and development finance projects, particularly in Africa, Europe, and Asia. She's also well-versed in other areas, including sustainable agriculture, climate resilience, circular economy, entrepreneurship, and investment facilitation. And Karnika strongly believes in using the entrepreneurship-led approach for solving social and development challenges in emerging economies. And this is what she has been working towards. She has been working with innovative social enterprises and impact businesses in scaling their solutions while creating livelihood opportunities for low-income populations, particularly for women and youth. So Karnika, I would like to give the floor to you to speak first, and I will introduce each of the panelists in turn. In the meantime, I would like to request all the participants, if you have any questions while she is speaking and while you hear the other speakers as well, please put your questions in the chat box so that the panelists can respond to it at their own time, so that we do not if we do not have time to take up questions in an open floor, at least you will have your questions answered in the chat box. Yes, Karnika, floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. Thanks a lot, Shruti, for inviting me to speak at this panel. And thanks a lot, everyone, for joining this very, very relevant discussion and topic today, and sparing your time to participate in this session. I'll just provide a bit of a background of our organization, just to give a context where we are, where I am coming from, and how do I see this, how and what I can add to this discussion this afternoon, this morning. So I work for an internet organization called as IntelliCap, which is a part of a group called as Avishkar Group. The group was started about 20 years back in India with the vision to use entrepreneurship-led approach for solving the development challenges across emerging economies in the global south, that is Asia, Africa, Latin America, South America, and so on. And why entrepreneurship-led approach? Because over the years, all of us who are living in these emerging economies in the global south, what we have found is that that the solutions cannot be directly replicated from one part of the world to the other, and they need to be sustainable in nature for them to scale. And entrepreneurs who have the knowledge of the on-ground realities are able to create more sustainable and scalable solutions which can solve the development challenges for the long-term basis. And that's how the organization and the group was originated, to provide the capital, knowledge, and the networking support to the businesses, impact businesses, social enterprises, and assist them in scale and their growth. And over the last 20 years or so, we have worked with over 2,000 plus impact businesses that are working in the space of solving the problems for the women, for the youth, and as well as some of the most hard-pressing problems that exist in these emerging economies, such as climate change, health, water and sanitation, agriculture, which is where most of the people in these countries are employed in circular economy. So that's where we work and provide advisory support. And as an organization, as we were working, what we have identified, and therefore the entire work that we do, all the programming that we do, is we have seen that women are some of the most underserved categories or the population segment, even within these the otherwise underserved economy. So therefore, there needs to be solutions which are very, very intentional towards having women at the core of all the work and the programming that is done. Today, in this particular call, in this particular session, webinar, I've been asked to share my views on the gender, on the barriers and opportunities for gender and social inclusion in the context of climate resilience. So I'll be discussing what I have seen in my experience, what are some of the barriers and what are the opportunities for gender and social inclusion in the climate resilient context. So some of the barriers that exist, and I guess all of us who are in the call may not be not aware of these. There are a lot of gender biases and stereotypes that hinder the women and the marginalized groups and participation and decision making in the climate resilience initiatives. Women are not even brought to the table, while they are the ones which are most affected by the climate change, but then they are not even brought to the table, and their voices are not heard because of all these biases and the stereotypes that exist. So that's one of the main barriers that exist. The other barrier that also exists is that the women have limited resources in terms of finance, in terms of education, in terms of technology, information, which restrict their ability to adapt to the climate change impact effectively, and even participate in these discussions on the climate resilience. I'll just give some examples. For instance, those of us who are coming from Africa or Asia, um, um, particularly if you see the women living in the rural areas in Africa, access to clean water or access to clean cooking solutions is a big problem for the women in the rural areas. Women have to spend more than 7 to 8 hours on a daily basis accessing clean water or accessing even basic cooking stuff, and then which to use for the cooking purposes. And with the climate changes that are affecting in in Africa and with the other economies also, these problems are even getting exaggerated, because now with the floods, with the droughts that are becoming more and more prevalent, while women have been otherwise working like or spending 6 to 7 hours on a daily basis, now with the prevalent droughts, they have to even spend much more hours on a daily basis to have access to clean water. The with the and the same goes for accessing wood, charcoal for the cooking purposes. So that's sort of come bringing together the point that the women have limited access to the resources, and that's why they have ability is restricted on adaptability on the climate. The third point that I would like to bring here and discuss about is the lack of data and research. That is the lot of programming that is done currently. While in the last few years, I've seen that a lot of gender disaggregated data is now getting incorporated into the research, but otherwise, not a lot of gender disaggregated data was available. And within the gender also, women are not an homogeneous community. The women which are from the rural areas versus which are from the urban areas, women which are into jobs versus women that are into self-employment opportunities, women at the different income segments, they're all different types of women. So we cannot just homogenize the women. Well, we have started collecting the gender disaggregated data. There is a further need to disaggregate that data at a different layers from the income level, education level, to areas where they are living, for that data to become very relevant for making sure that women are participating and there is more and more gender and social inclusion in the climate practices. Institutional and policy constraints still at the government level still is a problem at the government level. The policies are not completely adaptable to the women in their respective geographies. So more and more policies has to come up. I'll say one of the main thing that a lot of times affect the woman into and hinders the woman's chances into participation is in the workforce is the care work that the women have to undertake, and very few countries across the globe have proper or well-defined care policies that are able to support the women in the care work. So that's again another thing that is required, or that are barriers that are there. But having said that, while these barriers exist, there are also a lot of opportunities that exist, and what can be done for more gender and social inclusion in the climate resilient state. And this comes from our work that we are doing with the private sector. More and more gender mainstreaming and awareness creation in the private sector. Particularly, I'm not talking about the private sector, the corporates or the multinationals, which are well aware of the gender policies and all, but the SMEs. In which more than 80% or 70 to 80% of the people are employed in the emerging economies. the SMEs or these small businesses, private sector businesses, always do not have the capacity or the knowledge or the awareness how they can implement more gender mainstreaming efforts in the businesses. So I think that's one of the key opportunity that exists where if we are able to build the capacity of these private sector businesses, but at the SME level, for the more gender mainstreaming efforts so that they are able to get more and more women across their value chain, not just as an employer within their employment base, but across the value chain. So more women supplying to them as customers, more women supplying to them as suppliers, or more women customers that they are targeting, and they are doing all their work, which is very targeted in nature. So that's one key opportunity that I see that exists. The another key opportunity that I also see that exists is in taking community-based approaches. So as we are looking to develop or as we are looking to get more and more women involved in climate resilience, it's important that the either at the business level, private sector level, or the development programs level, that it is important that more and more communities are getting involved, their voices are heard, and within those communities, specific efforts are taken to make sure that the women voices are heard, and they are provided with the resources and capabilities to be climate resilient. And then lastly, I will say the last opportunity that exists is on the knowledge sharing and the awareness aspect. All of us who are here in the call, a lot of us are doing very interesting work across gender and social inclusion. It is critical that we are sharing this knowledge and learnings across our peers and making sure that we are intentional in the work that we are doing as we are designing and implementing these programs. And as I earlier said, that it is important that we are not looking gender as just one parameter, but layering the various layers of gender and not just considering women as one homogeneous segment, but segregating it and then dealing and developing programs accordingly. Yeah, I will stop here, and I think I'm on my 10 minutes mark as well. So back to you, Shruti.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for the inputs. I think, yeah, there are barriers, and like you rightly pointed out, there are opportunities as well. It was interesting that you pointed out the SMEs. You're right that most of the larger organizations would probably have some kind of women-oriented policies now in place. But yes, SMEs do need the capacity building and the knowledge, the awareness of how to mainstream women in their businesses. And yeah, a lot of them are actually led by women as well, so that their concerns, if they're taken into consideration, that does give a very good opportunity for also the women to develop on their own. So yeah, thank you for your inputs. I think there are some questions in the chat box. If you would like to respond to them while we move on to our next panelist, I think we will have some time to take up some open questions as well. But in the meantime, maybe you can still respond to the questions in the chat box. Thank you. So moving on to our next speaker, Dr. Maniram Banjare. He is the principal investigator of the CREW project. This is co-producing a shock-resilient ecosystem for women-led enterprises in Nepal from South Asia Institute of Advanced Studies in Nepal. He has over 2 decades of experience in research, monitoring, and evaluation and capacity building, particularly in community forestry, local governments, policy analysis, deliberative governance, inclusive development, and livelihoods improvement. Dr. Banjare has 2 decades of work experiences. Currently, he is involved in experimenting and facilitating deliberative processes at community level, and facilitating multi-stakeholder processes at the international, national, and subnational levels. Dr. Banjare, I believe you have a presentation if you'd like to share your screen.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Besosruti, yeah? Bedosruti. Okay. Thank you very much. Let me share quickly. Okay, can you hear? Can you see?
Yes, we can see.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you all for joining today's session. I will be presenting today on particularly one case and bringing the insights from that case from our ongoing project, as she already mentioned, on women's economic empowerment. This particular case showcases the significance of integrating multiple approaches in triggering certain changes in societies, okay, in marketplaces. Particularly, we use the idea of intersectionality when we talk about gender, social inclusion, climate resilience, and also talking about the enterprises. We also integrated this multi-stakeholder deliberative forums. That also includes a certain type of feedback from the research and analysis, and engendering reflective processes among stakeholders through those processes. And also we try to engage with local government and other relevant stakeholders in continuous basis, so that we can support and provide them required capacity to facilitate those processes. This is Hat Bazaar. This is a Hat Bazaars in Nepal are very local marketplaces where small rural farmers and other traders come in weekly basis to sell their products. Okay. We use this approach when we are working in the district, Western Hill of Nepal. They used to have a Hat Bazaar system in the district headquarters, where farmers and leaders, they jointly organize and work together to set up the institutional mechanism can together every week and sell their produce. But because of pandemic, it was not possible. It was closed. And post-pandemic also, it was very difficult for them to reopen the Hat Bazaars. And because the Hat Bazaars were closed and local leaders who were trying to reopen it were not successful, particularly women from very poor women who were growing commercial vegetables in their small parcel of land, they could not produce and sell in the market. Either they had to sell it to the intermediaries or to the local vendors, where they would get very almost half of the price they used to get in the Hat Bazaar. So there was a very important component in our research as well. We realized that it should have been open much before that, and we used we consulted with not only the women farmers but also other key actors who were there actively active in these localities, local government, and also other organized and less organized entrepreneurs and their forums. We also did some kind of research and analysis, and also presented that analysis into those forums, in the deliberative forums. And we also engaged with the marketing group that farmers created to market to sell their produce, also to transport those produce to outside the district as well. So local government was also keen to be part of it, and we engaged them into entire processes. So all these processes, because it took several months, several rounds of meetings and engagement with those stakeholders. And finally, there was success in reopening the Hat Bazaar. And that had a very ups and downs and different experiences among the women farmers as well, small rural farmers. They were frustrated at times, but at the end, it was a reward for them. Their voice was given a space during the deliberative forums as well. All the stakeholders who wanted to reopen that joined together to lobby with the other powerful actors. They formed the committees. They also held meetings and discussions to identify the key problems within that. And from our side also, we supported them very small in terms of very in funding terms, it was very small, but in terms of supporting and providing the intellectual input, it was a very big one. So they finally could reopen the Hat Bazaar. Now they have 2 days Hat Bazaar, Tuesdays and Fridays from January, and it is functioning very actively. But there are also some issues, particularly with local small rural farmers who can come into the Hat Bazaar only after their completing their household course, and maybe they come around 11 or 12. By that time, big houses and other traders would occupy the main strategic location for them. So they are now discussing how they can safeguard their space into that particular Hat Bazaar. So they are working with local governments and other actors and develop their certain level of rules and rights to ensure that particularly local women farmers they can get the secured place into that space also. Main issue and main reward for them is that they can sell their produce without much hassle. Otherwise, they used to be scolded by the local vendors. They used to get very low price. Sometimes they had to bring their produce back home or throw that into the rivers or some other place. A very difficult and panicking experience of many of the smaller women farmers. So it was very useful approach of integrating this intersectionality, multi-stakeholder delivery forum, at the same time through the researchers and experts, providing some hands-on analysis of the information, policies, and other things, and feeding that into those deliberative forums was very useful in that case. So, but there are many challenges and resistance from also the existing powerful groups, powerful vendors who would be benefiting more if there were no any hard bazaars in those areas. Okay. And there are other issues also they are dealing with. For example, establishing a hard bazaar cold store into the place, and also working with the local government, how their local government can facilitate more to sustain this type of processes. Okay, even if there is no project, and if there are other stronger stakeholders resisting those opening of hard bazaars, how the local government can be more proactive and helping the needy and poor women who are benefited out of it. That was the small experience case study from our side. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. I think it shows a really nice case study of how local women are impacted and how smallholder women farmers are impacted and how they can be benefited by a concerted action.
Mhm.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. I think if there are questions, kindly use the chat box again, and I will move on to our final speaker. I think we will have some time to take up open questions as well, given that speakers are maintaining their time very effectively. So yeah, I will move on to our final presenter now. Our last presenter is Mary Dupar. She is from ODI. She is the Senior Technical Advisor in the Global Risks and Resilience Program, with a lot of experience in climate risk management and ecosystem-based adaptation to climate change. She works with colleagues in Africa, South Asia, and Latin America on enhancing and ecosystem functions for nature and people. As part of a holistic approach to implementing the Paris Agreement on climate change, She has also written extensively on social inclusion, especially in historically disadvantaged groups in climate policies and investments, and on climate change adaptation more broadly. She has been working at ODI since 2010 as part of the Climate and Development Knowledge Network, previously as the head of knowledge management, and now she is a senior technical advisor. Mary, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Shruti. Yes.
Thank you. So you would need to, I think, move the slides.
That's great. Thank you. So today I'm really pleased to share with you news of updated training engagement resources that CDKN has produced on the subject of gender equity and social inclusion, which we hope you will be able to log into and use freely for your own efforts in various cities and countries around the world. So my question to you is, do you have the tools you need to include all relevant stakeholders' interests in your climate project? Next slide, please. And specifically, do you have the tools for all stages of the program cycle or project cycle to drive gender equitable and socially inclusive programs, the assessment and the analytic tools, the options assessment and planning tools, the management strategies and operational procedures for delivery, and monitoring and evaluating work and learning, and do you have the tools you need to garner awareness and support of team members in your organization or allies in the broader policy and implementation space for gender equity and social inclusion? Because if you're missing any of those things, that's what we aim to deliver in our slide pack. So yeah, you can advance to the project cycle slide that comes next, the colorful one. Thanks, Ritu. So what we've done in our training pack is we cover practical guidance on how to incorporate gender equitable and socially inclusive approaches at all stages of what shows here as the program or project cycle, from the understanding people's needs, specifically the climate risk, climate vulnerability and impact assessment piece of climate programming, through to assessing gender responsive, we also use the term gender equitable solutions and planning based on people's diverse knowledges and experience, committing a gender equitable monitoring, evaluation and learning framework, committing an equity responsive budget, implementing fair and inclusive activities, and monitoring and evaluating equity outcomes. And in addition to covering the program or project cycle, we also have introductory modules in our training and engagement pack, which are about the international frameworks, which contextualize gender equity in climate action specifically, with some interactive participant exercises around those. And we have quite a chunky module on why does gender matter at all? Because we recognize that you're operating in extremely different circumstances, even from one day to the next, with different groups of stakeholders. Some people you'll be engaging with and creating programs with will totally get it and be very eager to have gender equitable and socially inclusive approaches, and some will need convincing. So we've created this second module in this set, which is for making the case for having more gender equitable and inclusive approaches. Next slide, please. We also have a manual called Advancing Gender Equality and Climate Action, which takes and puts into PDF format a lot of the sort of guidance that we have in the PowerPoint modules. And this also goes into sector-wise case studies, which give a lot of granularity around the kinds of targets and indicators that you may wish to consider at a program level, and the different types of gender analysis and strategy that other projects have undertaken significantly. So there's a lot of learning in there. Next slide, please. Now, the idea is that if you navigate to cdkn.org/gender training, you'll find a mix of PowerPoint slides for download, and you are absolutely free to edit these and make them your own. We have put the majority of the material in PowerPoint slides and Word documents so that you can take the material, edit it, manipulate it for your own context. We are making this available under a Creative Commons attribution, non-commercial use license. Just attribute to CDKN any of the materials that you use, but we want you to really take it and make it your own. So you will find here on this page a mix of those slide packs, which you can use not just for presentational purposes, but they have a lot of suggestions for interactive exercises and discussions in them for training or awareness raising of groups of people. You'll find also some downloadable and very colorful card games, which are intended to generate discussion. They can be downloaded and printed or even played in the virtual environment over Zoom and through breakout groups. We've certainly done that in the past. And you'll also find some word-based documents such as the Jessie bingo game to just print off and share around in a workshop kind of context, which gets people exchanging information about good practices in operationalizing gender equitable climate activities. Next slide, please. So we also have a range of infographics, and we're really happy to say today that we've managed to launch a whole new bunch of infographics on the webpage. So do go and explore them. We've developed these based on international data. They're infographics which are relevant to implementing climate projects. The one that you see here is an infographic about violence against women, because we find that gender-based violence can be a very significant barrier to implementing projects, to even getting them off the ground in terms of women's meaningful participation. So we've done a set on gender-based violence in different regions and countries, and it's accompanied by a case study of a very effective climate adaptation program in Chad, which tackled gender-based violence head-on, even as it was also trying to advance climate change adaptation. Next slide, please. We also have a new set of infographics we're delighted to launch about the different levels of water insecurity experienced by women and men, which we've produced for key regions and countries based on the household water insecurity scales, which is an international data set. So the next slide, please. Thanks. One of the rather quirky or unique offerings that we have in the set is the interactive role play game. You see a couple of cards from it here, which is based on different people's talents, abilities, and vulnerabilities to climate change. And the point I really want to make here is not so much that we have interactive, serious, fun games to play in the pack, but the point that the entire training and engagement pack is optimized for adult learning. And that's really the point here, that it's optimized for encouraging people to speak about their lived experiences, to exchange knowledge, and to have this interactivity. Because as you and I know, when you attend a training or any kind of educational activity, you normally learn more from the other participants than you do from the educator per se, if it's very well designed. So that's what this is all about. It's to get people talking about their lived experiences and how they have also experienced solutions as well as challenges in their work. Next slide, please. So the next slide is also showing, again, this kind of optimization for adult learners about how there are different templates. This is showing a problem tree template, which we have for download as part of the pack, where groups can work together to unpack what are central climate and development problems, the underlying root causes, and some of the cascading impacts that come about from climate challenges. And this is the basis for then generating options for solutions. Next slide, please. And then finally, the PowerPoint slides summarize some key learning points from case studies. And here's an example. So, and we've also been having some chats in the Zoom room today about discriminatory gender norms and how you overcome that. So one of the case studies that we have in the training pack is about the Energizing Development Program in Tanzania, and this was run by the international NGO SNV, and they helped to put together this case study. It's very encouraging, very motivating, because it's about women's empowerment in the energy sector. And what it demonstrates is that it's possible to create a climate and energy program which goes far beyond women's traditional roles, if you like, in the kitchen as cook stove users in this particular case. And NDEV sort of flips that convention on its head and set targets and indicators to ensure that women were provided with a fair share in the production, marketing and sales of cook stoves. Next slide, please. So just to elaborate on this particular case study example, the results were that there were robust female-led sales figures for these reduced emissions cook stoves, improving women's income, also their confidence and their community standing. And some of the key enablers of change were intentional measures within the programme to encourage men to be allies, really geared towards preventing some kind of rejection or backlash against women's enhanced status, and holding facilitated household dialogues to demonstrate the olive family and olive community benefits of women's economic empowerment in the context of this Clean Cook Stove programme. There were also activities for women to support each other, namely through supporting women role models to speak to, make videos about their experience to share with other women, and to support women's formation of advocates groups to give each other a chance for peer-to-peer learning and morale boosting. So that's just one example. Next slide, please. I'm just showing there how this links back to a deeper case study, which you could find in the manual. That's just how the slide pack would summarize some key learnings, and then it would point to the manual, which you'll find on cdken.org/gender equality to get into some broader detail and learning. So that's really the presentation of what we're launching today. We're so glad to share it with you. And you can navigate straight to the website and start downloading. And please ask me any questions about it, or I'm sharing my email address for you to send any follow-up queries. Thanks very much.
Thank you,
Last
Mary,
slide,
for the
please.
Thanks, Mary, for this presentation. I think we have about 5 minutes of time. So if there are any questions from the audience, please raise your hand. We can unmute you and then you can ask your question. I don't see any hands. Okay, in that case, so we have this group activity planned as part of, okay, I see a hand, Patience. She was patiently waiting.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I had posted my question on the group. I've been following the gender and climate issues, and I've also had a course in my studies, but I'm really interested to pursue it on a practical level, especially on my research thesis. So I would like to ask if it's possible to partner with any of the organizations, just so that my thesis becomes a bit practical oriented than just for the sake of submitting a thesis.
I think that can be done. We can share our email addresses. You could probably write to us in detail a little bit, and then we can take that bilaterally.
Okay, thank you so much. Where can I get the email addresses?
I will just put it in the chat box.
Thank you so much. I'm answered.
Is there any other question? seems there is a question about how do we accelerate the incorporation of disaggregation into data collection processes? Does anybody from the speakers want to take up this question? I think it was mentioned by Karnika.
Sorry, Shruti, which question are you referring to? I have responded to some questions in the chat.
Yeah, there's one in the Q&A box actually. How accelerate incorporation of disaggregation in processes? If there are any suggestions on the acceleration of incorporating disaggregated data.
Yeah, so what I'll say is, and I think Mary can also come on this point as well, since they've been working on a lot of knowledge collection as well in this space. I think the first point to data disaggregation will be to identify what do we want to use this data for? So a lot of times where we start with, okay, let's just disaggregate the data to males and females, and that's it. But will that data just assist us in designing the programs or the solutions that we want to? And assist us in achieving those objectives? That may not happen. So I guess it's very critical that we identify what are the goals that we want to achieve and accordingly design the data collection, the M&E framework, impact assessment frameworks accordingly. The acceleration part will be from the perspective that the way we are collecting the data is not cumbersome on the from the people that we are collecting this data from. So that's one point. We need to be cognizant of the fact that how much data that they can provide. We should also be cognizant of the fact that we are taking care of the privacy and not sharing the data without any consent from the people from whom we are collecting the data. Yeah, these are some of the things top of mind on acceleration of the gender disaggregated data.
Thank you so much. I see some questions also on involving women in planning and implementation of projects, ensuring that we are not putting an even higher burden on them, especially in projects related to water and food. Is there any suggestions in that matter from the speakers? How do we get women to be involved more in the projects without putting additional burden, especially when they're already involved in care work?
I can come in on that, Shruti. It's exactly the right question, and it's quite hard to give a generic response because it should be locally and contextually addressed. I was chatting with a colleague about this the other day who said that in his context, the way to reduce women's burden was to basically provide a nice hot dinner when you had the meeting about the climate project. So everyone would get fed there, and the women would not have to do the cooking, and they would be able to leave the meeting with a nice wrapped up package of hot dinner to give to their families as well, so that they didn't get some kind of a backlash when they arrived home because they hadn't made the dinner. So that was really suitable for that particular context, but it would have to be, I think, locally devised.
Yeah,
That's a very...
and
Yes,
one
please
of the
go
other
ahead.
things, yeah, one of just adding to Mary's point, one of the work that we were doing was focused on just focused on creating livelihood opportunities for the refugee communities, but then that program didn't take into consideration a lot of gendered aspects of that. While that program was providing the financial and the technical support to the businesses, the community businesses, and assisting them to start or scale their businesses. But from our research, what we saw was that most of these businesses, particularly or the groups, community business groups, which were led by women, they were doing very good in the earlier parts, but then over a year or 2 years, most of these businesses either had considerably scaled down or actually has shut down. So when we probed further on into it, what we realized was that while on one hand the program has focused on supporting women in providing them income generation opportunities, livelihood opportunity, but it didn't take care of the care work, the domestic work that the women have still need to do at the end of the day. So women was just feeling overburdened. On one hand, they have to take care of their business, but when they go back, they still have to take care of all the care work and the domestic work that they were supposed to even earlier do. So then they thought, okay, I can't be so stressed. Let me just shut down my business because even the money that was coming, the women didn't have full agency on the money that they were generating out of it or profits that they were generating. So I guess there's a need to have a holistic view when designing these programs, and all the programs I believe should definitely have an aspect of taking care of the care aspects, particularly the livelihood programs that are there focused on the women. They definitely should have care aspects integrated into those programs for those to be sustainable in the long-term basis.
Thank you. There is another question about references regarding climate and gender in dense urban cities from North Europe, similar to Paris. I don't know if any of the speakers would have any examples of this. If so, if you could put in the chat box, that would be very helpful. I think in the interest of time, I will not take any more questions right now, but we will move on to the next part of our session, which is a breakout group. If Ritu, you can please share the questions, share the screen. We'll be putting you all into 4 groups. We have some of us would be there in the groups as facilitators. We have 4 questions that we will be looking at, and we would want you to discuss one of these questions. Each of the group will be given 1 question, and you would be requested to discuss on these from your experiences, what you feel, and you can respond to that in the group. We would want you to come up with 1 key outcome from your discussions and present it to the larger audience once you come back. You can select your presenter from somebody in the group, or it could be just the facilitator who is already facilitating the discussion. They can come back and report to the larger group, and we will have some comments from our presenters on this. So if we look at the groups, we have group 1, where who will be discussing, as an urban practitioner, what the key challenges you're facing when you're integrating GESI during project formulation or further implementation, and how do you navigate such scenarios? What has been your learnings from integration of GESI? If you have any learnings, please feel free to share. We would all like to know. In the group 2, we will be discussing about this. So unless vulnerable or marginalized groups, including indigenous groups, are explicitly targeted and engaged, it is likely that they will not incur the project's benefits. So in any case, so in any project that we are looking at, any development project that we are looking at, how do you ensure that everyone, especially the vulnerable, the indigenous, the marginalized groups, have equitable access to the project outcomes and outputs? How do you ensure that GESI is not limited to only gender, which is women in this case, but can also include other marginalized populations, indigenous populations, disabled, ethnic minorities, among others, during decision making and implementation? And the next question, the group 3 will be looking at measuring change allows projects and partnerships to learn, improve, and ultimately focus on what works and what needs to change. But how do you ensure that monitoring and evaluating the GESI-related activities and changes and the changes that are brought about are not only measured in quantitative terms, but also in qualitative terms? So you're not looking only at number of women who are targeted or who are benefited, but actually in real change in the real world, how the quality of life is also improving. How do you measure that? Going to group 4, we would be looking at why it is important to integrate gender and social inclusion in urban planning and development, especially climate planning and actions. And if you could highlight how women act as agents of change and not only as the victims of climate change. So if you have examples from your experiences, please share that in this group. We will be having about 15 minutes to discuss this in the different groups. And yeah, may I request my colleagues to please start the breakout groups. Okay, so I hope you had a good discussion in your groups. Our group had a nice discussion. I think there were quite a few interesting comments from the participants. We would now want to have a quick summary, like 30-second summary of what was discussed in these last 15 minutes in your group. Maybe we can start with group 1.
Yeah, Shruti. First of all, I would definitely say that it was really an insightful discussion, and all participants provided, their based on their experience, they have provided these very good points. So, what I understand after the discussion, that the communication is one of the important points what came up during our discussion. Communication in terms of not only involve women and other marginalized group, and how to reach them, how to inform them that what is the idea when you are planning or preparing, or even if you are going to implementing any development project. You will have to communicate properly. You will have to involve them in this communication. We should understand that they don't have very good experience, in all these aspects. So your communication will definitely help them to understand. And we also had one important point to come up, that people were talking about, the acceptance, these kind of activities from a society which is patriarchic. So there are a lot of, our group members suggested that continuous awareness program and long-term involvement of, decision maker can change this, this situation. Also, I think this is two important points what I want to tell. Though there are a lot of other things to we had discussed. I would request if anyone else from the group 1, if you want to add anything, please add. Thank you.
Maybe if something has to be added, you can just put it in the chat box while we move on to the next group, group 2.
Hi, Shruti. So we also had a quite interesting discussion where a few points have came up. To start with, to start with, the primary important part is having an intense assessment at the beginning of providing any solution, so that engagement of all categories of marginalized sections of people are considered in that like climate risk or vulnerability assessment. There is one example of Afghanistan, where the urban rural divide was a major issue, where urban people were still coming up with participating in the solutions, but the communication or remoteness of the rural areas are a major problem. So resorting to basic mode of communication like telephone, or where women can engage themselves staying at home from their like considering the socio-cultural norm in certain areas, that is a major that will create a major impact. In few cases, like leveraging upon the traditional skill for economic empowerment is a major aspect that need to be considered. Also, involving the older people in the decision making process, where intergenerational skill can be transformed to the current generation as a mean of livelihood generation. That is very important aspect of like also setting up some MSME sectors and getting them involved in those kind of economic generation opportunity. Another important point is where like integration of youth and gender together. So women might have certain physical restriction in terms of handling larger machines. That was one of a case in Uganda, where women were involved in briquette making industry, but where there was some restriction in terms of handling those machines, where youth can be engaged. It's not always like women empowerment does not mean that women have to like take everything on themselves. Creating a balance by involving other group of the other strata of the society, so that the actual skill of women can be incorporated in the solution. That is also another important aspect. And overall, like in general, capacity building is very important, and involving all, not only women, involving all categories of marginalized people in the like all the stakeholder consultation proportionately, like taking an assessment of all this marginalized group in the beginning of the any activity, and ensuring their appropriate participation is very important. So anything else that if any of the group members want to put forth?
Again, I will request people to put them in the chat box. Thank you, Anuradha. We can move on to group 3.
Okay, good afternoon again. So group 3, we were on the monitoring and evaluation part, and we had discussions around that. So yeah, the first point, what we agreed was that a dedicated budget has to be there for conducting these kind of, because we agreed that the qualitative part has to be incorporated into the monitoring, because that provide valuable insights onto the underlying factors or the barriers. So a dedicated budget has to be there while designing the project already, to have the male budget, because that would be the limiting factor already, because the resources is always required to have these kind of assessments. And the other part is that there were discussions on the participatory methods to capture these qualitative aspects, because what Mairi also mentioned was what CDKN is also doing on the storytelling, the case stories. So these would be the tools that would capture the qualitative informations that would be required for identifying what is driving the change, or what are the barriers in integrating JC. So these were the points that were discussed. I think if Ritu has something to add on to this, or even Mairi can come into this, because that's what I captured from the discussions that we had because we all agree that the qualitative as well as quantitative informations together will only give the bigger picture, or will give the in-depth understanding, not only the quantitative aspects. That's what the group had the discussions. So if something is there to add, please feel free to add to all the group members, I would say.
Thank you so much, Meg. Moving on to group 4, the last group.
Yes, thank you. So we did have a very interesting discussion, and it moved beyond just looking at talking about gender and looking at how there's a clear distinction between urban integration of GESI in urban planning as well as rural planning, and how even in our discussions and the examples that we were giving, there was more information on how GESI can be integrated into rural planning, but in urban it becomes very difficult, as the government already has pre-planned notions of how they want to integrate GESI or how the plans are to be developed. So in terms of inclusion of women and the misrepresented communities and vulnerable communities, it becomes quite difficult and very challenging in those terms. So it is important. What we looked at was specifically looking at gender and climate budgeting and inclusion of GESI in these aspects. Another aspect that we also looked at was how it has to be contextualized. So it has to be gender sensitive and contextualized. So every plan that is developed needs to have different stakeholders come in and develop these plans. So there cannot be piecemeal methods that are used, but a contextualization is very important. Then the other thing was looking at views of championships. So mentoring and trust building among the community is important to develop these kind of integration activities as well. And of course, the way that we can start off with that is to have a collective agenda and look at small communities, whether it is in terms of residential communities or our uninformal settlements that we have. Those areas could be the beginning or the start of some of the integration that we do in terms of GESI. So these were the aspect. If anybody has any more points to add, please do from the group 4. Thank you.
Thank you. And I see there are some comments on the group work from, I think, group 1 I saw. Yes, this is from group 1, which is already in the chat box. But I would want to now ask our panelists if they have any responses to these comments that they heard from the 4 groups. I know you could not be in all the groups, of course, but if you want to quickly comment in 1 or 2 minutes on what you heard from the different groups. May I request? Yes, please.
Okay. No, this was very interesting discussion in our group. We were talking about urban planning and making GESI relevant for it. And for us, many of us were working mostly on urban settings rather than rural. So we were wondering what type of insights we can draw from the work we have been engaged in integrating GESI into our other planning processes. So as Pratibha rightly noted, the integration is in a way piecemeal basis now. So there should be certain kind of integrated approach to gender mainstreaming into urban, particularly budgeting, climate budgeting and other budgeting should be there. One of the issues that our participant also raised on that was that. So other issue was that we have been working on women champions and facilitating, trying to trigger change through that process. So we can also think of identifying those champions in the rural, urban settings as well, and instigate certain processes through them. That was all we discussed. It was very interesting discussion though.
Thank you. This integration of champions is something that I think our group also discussed to a little bit, in the sense that having somebody to actually reach out with information, somebody who's trustworthy, somebody who the other community members can trust, is useful when it comes to engaging women. Bringing women into the platform is sometimes a challenge. So having these kind of reliable community leaders, or here in case of our example, I think somebody raised the example of health workers or ASHA workers, Anganwadi workers who are, she was from India. So these are Indian examples who work in the communities, could be a really good way of winning the trust of the community. Anybody else wants to comment? Mary or Karnika?
You've all said it so well. I'm not sure that I can add a lot more. I mean, I'm just really agreeing with you, Shruti, and also what Mani just said. I was going to reflect on the importance of civil society organizations more generally, and particularly in the very challenging urban context like the informal settlements, which Pratibha mentioned. I have the privilege to be working on a research project around locally led adaptation with lots of inputs from communities and CSOs, particularly in informal settlements, and they often provide that kind of continuity of effort and energy, and integrating Jessie and disadvantaged people's concerns, which is so important, particularly if in an informal setting, the municipal authority is not engaging that well. It varies obviously from place to place, but I think you also see, I remember so clearly one of the stories I received from essentially a woman champion who felt like she'd taken the world on her shoulders, doing all this organizing during the pandemic era to try and keep others going, and she said she was just exhausted, but because she was taking on so much, but in a way that the presence of the civil society organization around her was helping to sustain her and then disperse some of the workload. There are issues with volunteerism generally. We've talked about that in the session today. The people who are holding it together are often working on a voluntary basis, and that's not really fair. So, there are lots of things I guess to tease out there. But the other point I was going to make is in urban environments, I'm also recognizing that there can be a lot of demographic turmoil, almost like lots of in-migration, can be displacement from hazards which are experienced, particularly in informal settlements, and that can sort of disrupt forms of social capital that we're starting to form. And sometimes it can be a bit more stable. Again, it depends on the context, but in the rural area, if you don't have as much demographic change going on. So in a way, civil society organizations can provide anchors of stability when there are those kind of disruptive forces and the big demographic turmoils happening in an urban setting.
Thank you so much, Mary. Karnika, any last words? Don't see her. I don't think she is anymore with us. Okay, in any case, I think we had a really good discussion, and I would like to, we're already out of time, so I would like to now thank the panelists for their time, for their inputs, and for all the participants. Thank you for your participation in the discussions and for making the session so interesting. Thank you for all your questions, your comments, your suggestions. I think we can now close the session. Yes, the recordings will be shared, and maybe now we can just have our last say from our Daring Cities our team, and they have something to present to the audience before we leave.
Yes, just to say, coming up next on 17th of August, we'll have another session. We just put the registration link in the chat box. So please register. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We can now close the session.